Meeting to order, flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, please. Roll call, please.
Go ahead.
President Norris,
I have not heard from her.
She should be here
She should
shortly.
be here shortly.
Vice President Herron.
Here.
Secretary Spikers.
Here.
Commissioner Pollard.
Here.
Commissioner Carter.
Here.
And I would like to make a motion to switch the compliance to be number 2 and the post-affiliation budget discussion as number 1. I have an obligation to pick up my son. I gotta leave here about 7:50.
Do you have a,
Do not want to miss that part.
second? All right, it's been motion and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Nay, all those opposed? Okay, motion carried. So we'll move 2 to 1, and 1 goes to the second place. Okay, approval of agenda, please. Emily?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
A second.
Been seconded. Topics for discussion today, again, the first one will be post-affiliation budget discussion. I'm sorry, I should start with work study. This is a work study, Wednesday, July 31st, 2019, 6:30 p.m., rescheduled from Wednesday, July 24th, 2019, the Snoqualmie Valley Hospital North-South Conference Room, Snoqualmie, Washington. And just for your information. Okay, the first on the agenda is post-affiliation budget discussion, part 4. Who is going to be presenting? Oh, Steve.
Presenting will be myself and Keith Clement
Okay.
from Jaffrey.
Go ahead.
For the record, Ariel just walked in.
Yeah, I got
Yes.
caught by what I thought was a
6:35.
patient out on the walkway for a while. And didn't quite let me go.
Welcome back.
Really?
Then take over. This was moved for the record. This
Okay,
was moved to
great.
1, compliance moved to 2nd because Commissioner Spikers is leaving to pick up
So,
the son.
Okay, thank you, Emma.
Just to let you know. Okay.
Had we chosen to put it on our way?
Not yet, not yet. We're still on the topics for discussion. Okay.
So, welcome. We will put up the slides in a second. Okay, thank you. First topic, we want to talk again, and it's a continuing discussion about the post-affiliation budget. What the budget will be for the district after affiliation. And I want to start by saying, high level, what are the responsibilities of the Board of Commissioners after affiliation? Number 1, you're a landlord. You are renting, leasing the facility to open. This goes through. Population health of the district. Talked about some population health activities we want to do and develop. Oversight of tax dollars. District will be collecting tax dollars and paying the tax back debt. And then managing the debt, managing our tax back debt and our revenue bonds. And there are a number of requirements that we'll talk about in this presentation. So, next slide is,
Steve.
oh, good, thank you. something you've already seen. That's the budget we developed. So this is kind of a starting point. And Keith and myself have been talking and had a conversation with Eric Nicholson of Moss Adams. He presents the audit to you every year. And he talked about some adjustments we will make to this budget. Some things we hadn't thought about. And I want to not quickly, you can ask questions, go over those. First one would be, there will be expenses associated with transferring the operations of the hospital to Overlake, i.e. closing activities. The district will have to do a last payroll, and the expense for that will need to be included in the budget, doing that payroll.
I'm not sure they've actually seen that budget before.
We did.
Yeah,
Did you?
yeah.
Okay.
It's the one we went over last time. We have not done these revisions yet. Okay. Another thing we'll have to add in, there might be additional legal, accounting, and consultant fees after January 1 that would impact the profit and loss statement. And what we'll do is try to, as we get closer to closing the deal, get a very finite idea of what these expenses would be. We have to add a few expenses.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
Call to order. Madam, may I speak?
Yeah, you may speak.
I don't recall seeing this particular post-affiliation budget with all these years that is indicated here.
I think maybe,
It was grouped together
let's
with
just
something
walk
else.
you through it. Let's just walk you through it.
Because
then.
we-
Yeah,
My mistake,
please.
my mistake.
You've made several assumptions, I think it'd be helpful for them. to
Yeah,
see
I've
your
seen it so
assumptions.
many
They're really
times, I'm
solid.
probably too familiar
It was
with it.
grouped together
So,
with something
all
else.
right, thank you.
I didn't think it was
I know I
I thought.
I saw some, but I didn't see it the
Okay.
way it was laid out.
Let's keep,
Okay.
proceed and help
So
us out.
let's go through it then, and
Yeah.
kind of each line item. The first, the revenue. What's the revenue of the district? It's your tax revenue. And one of the most likely requirements in the agreement will be that the district claim its maximum tax revenue. We've increased the tax growth, the increase in taxes by 2%. That matches the historic growth in tax revenue for the district over the last quite a while. It grows about 2%.
So does it grow by 2% because of increase in King County, or 2% because of growth and King County taxes combined increased?
Growth, because usually it is growth of new construction within the district.
Okay.
New property being constructed and valued in the district.
In general, the district has an ability to increase that levy by
Yes.
1% every
Yes.
year.
So is that included in this?
Yes,
Yeah.
so it is,
So
yeah.
that additional 1% would be for the growth in property value, new
Okay.
construction.
Mhm.
So you're doing both, that's what I wanted to know.
Okay. The next item is the lease payment to the district. That's from Overlake. We put that at 5% above what we call revenue bond debt service. That's the amount the district has to pay to the bondholders in principal and interest payments. And we call that debt service. Expenses, that's salaries. We went over salaries for an executive director and a administrative person with some finance expertise. That's, and you've got benefits for those people. Legal, insurance, and audit costs. So there will be some legal costs. District will have to have an audit done. My recommendation, I don't know if you remember, was that the district have a quarterly kind of compliance review just to say, okay, it's a very complicated financial transaction you're in, the lease. So is everything being done that complies with the terms of the agreement and all the bond covenants in this transaction? And I've asked Moss Adams, what would you charge for this, and built that into the cost, the legal and audit costs.
I've got a question about
Sure.
insurance. It's pretty broad. I Yeah, I can think about 4 or 5 different types of insurance that we could potentially
Mhm.
have, like malpractice insurance, like property and liability.
Primarily, you
insurance.
need,
I can go down the
Yeah,
list.
oh, yeah.
Tell me what the insurance is.
primarily it's liability, comprehensive general liability coverage and property coverage. The district won't need malpractice, medical malpractice, because they won't be running the hospital. And I got that cost from our insurance broker.
So that's the DNO as well, included there?
Yeah, that would include directors and
That's what I
officers.
wanted
That's
to make
part
sure.
of the package we
Yes.
buy with comprehensive general
Are
liability.
we
Alright.
going to require Overlake to obtain their own insurance for their loss, their personal?
Yes, I would think so.
I would think yes, and if you
Yeah.
didn't, I urge you to. It'll probably be part of the affiliation
And I'm not
agreement.
talking about malpractice, I'm talking about other property.
Right.
Naming you as an additional
Yes.
named insured.
Named
Yeah.
insured and
Yeah.
such, yeah.
That's-
The board as a whole.
Mhm.
Or
That'll
the
be
district.
part of the
Common
negotiations.
business
You know,
practice.
you will, David, you bring a good point. You want to make sure that the district and you as the commissioners are adequately covered for the potential liability of your function. And that's going to be part of the negotiations.
Why does that figure, that line go down in 2025? Must be a reason.
Legal costs are down. I think I put legal costs down a bit.
I would
I'm
think
not
that
sure
legal
that
costs
that's
in the
going to go down.
25 would be higher, just
Yeah.
because we'd be looking at a potential.
I think that's an arithmetic mistake. to be
Yeah, it
honest
looks
with
like
you. I just tried to cut it myself. Okay?
Probably be 97.
It'll be about 90,000 or so. Yeah.
So,
Okay. The surface water management fee for East Campus, it's what we call property taxes, but it's not really property taxes. Commissioner and staff travel and such. Utilities and supplies. Depreciation, the depreciation for the hospital will be on your books.
Because we own the building supposedly. The district owns the building, right? That's
The
why we
district will own the building, correct, yeah. So, you know, again, you'll own the building and lease it to the leasing organization, Overlake, or what we call NewCo, however it works out. Interest on the revenue bonds and interest on the LTGO bonds. And those items will appear on your profit and loss statement. So,
I do have an issue with 2025. That seems to be like the key year. Either we're going to sell the property or we're going to have to do something else. So our budget could be, 3 times that, depending on what we need to do in year 2025. If Overlake does not purchase the property, assuming that we
Yeah.
have a good agreement,
Mhm.
then we're back to square one. And what equipment do we need? And now we have to go and look for.
Yeah, this,
staff.
David,
That's the reason there's
this
So
budget,
that's what I'm concerned about.
oh, yeah, that's gonna be one of the major negotiating points with Overlake is what happens in about September of 2025. I'm kind of thinking there will be a point where Overlake can say, this isn't working, say they walk away. How does the district come up with the funds to keep them going until they really repopulate the hospital with
Yeah,
management
you could
staff
cut
and such?
15,
And-
20 million,
Yeah, and,
or at least.
well, and then, yeah, that's why we talked about a trust account in past discussions, having cash available to the district to help with startup operations if Overlake walks away. That is not included in here. So, and if Overlake doesn't walk away, then would Overlake have access to that cash to increase services? That's going to be, again, a negotiating point. So,
so it's not included here. Where is it sitting now?
What do you mean, where is it city?
It's not included here, but the trust fund that we're talking about.
We don't
That's not
have the
budgeted.
trust fund in your profit and loss statement.
Oh.
The other point of negotiation is, how is that fund, how does the money get into that fund? There are a couple of possibilities, as I think about it. And I am not the smartest guy in the world, so I haven't thought of everything. But a portion of your tax revenue over LTGO debt service could go to a trust fund. And the district, at the end of the year, this year will probably have, we're talking about finance committee, $5.5 to $6 million in cash. Does some of that go into a trust fund? Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that's a negotiating point. Be a whole lot of negotiating points in getting this deal through.
So Steve, if I may for just a
Yeah,
second.
please
So,
do. Thank you.
just to, this is something that we're going to be looking at very closely, and it's something that bondholders are going to care just as much about as you guys do, is what happens in the event that Overlake walks away or Overlake ends up purchasing the hospital, and what do the documents allow for. That trust fund aspect of this is a key component to making sure that the hospital has the ability to start up operations again, and we're laser focused on it. It will be part of the negotiation process.
You know, if you ask me how much is that going to be, I have my ideas, but that's what it's going to be, is what's negotiated. And that's going to be a big negotiating point with Overlake.
Well, I do know that what it would cost to start up.
Oh, yeah.
And it's in the tens of millions.
It's a lot. I'm not,
So
Okay.
that's what I'm thinking. Even if we put up 3 million and they put up 3 million, that's not enough.
well, I mean, we're going to have to do some work on what do we think is an agreeable number to you guys first, to have in a trust fund, and where the expenses associated with basically taking over the hospital.
And the other key aspect of that is what happens to the district's excess revenues between now and then with respect to the tax levy, and how does that flow into the trust agreement, and how does the district have access to it, how does Overlake have access to it. Those are all parts of kind of the outlined, letter of intent that you've signed already, essentially.
Well,
Um,
Go
I
ahead.
think what he just said is something that the community is concerned about too. The community wants to know what's going to happen to tax dollars and where are the tax dollars going to go. So I think for the board,
Mhm.
and I could be wrong, but that's a real key
Mhm.
issue
Mhm.
for us to know
Yeah.
what that means and
Well,
how
it's
play out.
for you to decide what your position is and negotiate with the other party. You know, I can give you my ideas, but it is your, excuse me, that's not the
Yeah.
your decision
Yeah.
on going forward. And it's a very important decision. And that's why we want to bring it, kind of start talking about it.
Yes.
And Emma, you had a question?
No, I was going to tell Jen she could have the floor when you were done.
Oh, thanks. Would we expect to see an expense line here for public health grants or programs or the work that we were hoping to take on post-affiliation?
That's something we need to talk about and include it in this budget before we finalize it. This is not, I promise, a final budget. It is my thoughts, a starting point, but it's not the end point.
Right.
So.
And I think the important thing, and we'll get into this a little bit more to note though, is, the way that, the 105% of debt service, all of that is structured in, this is kind of a bare bones, just run the hospital kind of budget. And, there's not a whole lot of money, left
Right.
over.
Commissioner Harris. Okay, to follow up on, where the public hospital, since this is post-affiliation, have we considered, for example, if we were to establish our foundation, let's say a Snoqualmie Hospital Valley Foundation, to promote population health, community health, because that is post-affiliation, that might be something we will look forward to. So there will be some revenue and some expenses, of course. So that's one of the things that at least my opinion, that we will need to consider once post-affiliation happens.
Yeah.
Because we will be you know, looking at expanding the community services out there. So that might be something to add into, if you are going to do the budget. for us.
Yeah, I mean, and
The
again,
foundation,
that's
we
some
need to revive it.
decisions we're gonna have to make, management, you guys, and then put it into this before we have a final or even quasi-final document. And that's why we're opening this discussion and having a
I
discussion.
thought I'd bring this up at the work study because the foundations, yeah, is very important for the board because they will help us get some of that quality work done to make sure that we are delivering, you know, quality health and wellness program to our district constituents.
Mhm.
Okay, that's it,
Oh,
thank you.
what else? Because these are good ideas, and I don't want to stifle conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, he said, well, you're gonna go, yeah.
Where are you going?
I
Okay.
think the chair is the one who has the call, who calls.
Yeah, I know, I guess I can't do that, you know? I'm used to being that as a presenter. So-
Wake up.
I think, Emma, it's important that we not put ourselves in a position to have to rely on some other form of income. I think it's great to anticipate there being some other forms of income to make it even bigger or even better. But we're trying to construct something that is a predictable, or the way we know will happen. So to be able to set the lease payments and such in a way that will position us to be able to at least do something and to meet covenants. But not bringing in things like grants or
No, the
foundation.
foundation is critical to the
It-
work
it's-
of the board as well, that we need to
Sure.
partner.
No doubt about it, but it's not something we want to count on for this budget.
I'm looking at the future
Sure.
more of the
It is
revenue.
probably- You're absolutely right.
I guess
It's-
my question is, I know Overlake has its own hospital board foundation. We, the commissioners, would like to have our own particular foundation.
Absolutely fine. But
Something
this
that we
won't-
will probably
This budget
look
won't
into.
speak to
Okay.
that. Yeah, that's a totally
But that's-
separate idea, work, and such.
Okay, it's just something I wanted to know, that I wanted the commissioners to be aware where we are heading towards the future responsibilities that we have. Follow me? Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank
Oh,
you,
yeah.
Steve.
No.
Chair recognizes
here's
Jen.
my-
Wait, someone's in front of you, Jen.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so the punchline is up top with the lease payment to district. And looking at it right now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because is this just a starting point? Is this a wild
This
guess?
is a starting point.
Something that
Okay.
Overlake is expecting to not, like,
So, yeah,
you know, leaving us in debt for 2 years and leaving us with so little money left over for the community, which was the point of this whole thing, was to make a sustainable model where we would still have money left to give back to the community.
Okay, let me point.
With a segue, exactly what she was saying. What I'd like to see, I want to see instant bang for the buck on this for our community. I want to see them pitch in $500,000 the first year. As we start to make more money, they can start taking more money. Sort of so that we have some continuous income for our outreach. I do not want to see 351,000 negative the first year. So I think that would be something that's plausible, that they can take some money out of 2024 and 25. You know what I mean?
So
Yeah,
there's something
no, I
more
agree.
available.
So that,
And-
and they can give us some money in 2020, 21, and 22.
Okay.
So-
Yeah, I mean,
So, I think-
let me kind of, if you think I am presenting this to you as
Oh, I
any
know,
budget.
I know, but
But
this
this
is
is a
just
good,
an idea.
good discussion point, because,
These
you know,
are
what does it look
concerns
like,
everyone
kind of
has.
bare bones, and what do we want to negotiate going forward?
Well, that's a big,
That's a big one, yeah,
issue.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. This 2 negatives and then 31,000, that doesn't leave us with anything,
Mhm.
you know, so.
Keith is going to go over, after this, the cash buildup. You got to realize one of these lines called depreciation is a non-cash expense, so you're actually making some cash, but I'll let Keith get into that. So, okay. What else? It's good discussion. 'Cause Gene, I'm sorry, Daryl, was you
Commissioner
calling
Pollard, the
Gene?
chair recognizes you.
Yeah,
Please see right
I
there.
guess what I'd be concerned about is in year 2025,
Mhm.
we have to be prepared for them to walk away. In other words, we need to prepare for the worst and then hope for the best. By that, I would be most comfortable if we ensure that we have fully funded restart in 2025, even if we don't need it. They buy it, they continue, whatever it is. But we should be able to fully fund restart in 2025.
And, you know, if they buy it, then they can have that money that they put into the
That's right.
trust.
That's
So-
right.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about 10 million a long time, 2 years ago, when I said, we need to have 10 million at least, plus the money we have, just,
So one of, something
least.
we'll need to look at is, as an organization, you guys, what do we think the restart costs are, and we'll have to do some work on that, because there are restart costs. Off the top of my head, I'd play the wrong thing, but we need to do some research on it.
probably need about 2 million in repairs and maintenance by that time per year.
Right. Yeah, or, you know,
Got it.
fund depreciation, and fund some depreciation, is what they, it's a fancy word for saying, build up cash so you can replace stuff that's wearing out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Don't use it all and then walk away.
That's it.
Yeah.
And we'll monitor the quality of maintenance that's going on. all
Good
this
stewards will
time.
do that.
That's something that, you're right, that's a good point, something will need to be built
Yeah, that's us.
into
We're good stewards.
the agreement, is monitoring, making sure there don't be holes in the wall.
Yeah, they could put in every year the exact amount of depreciation on the building.
Mhm. It's called fully funded depreciation, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to see us have an annual inspection by us,
Are you taking
walk
notes?
through,
Thank you.
to make sure that the maintenance has been kept up with.
That's another important thing.
And who's gonna pay for the maintenance?
Who's going to pay for the maintenance?
Mm-hmm.
I think in the LOI, they've agreed to
I
maintain the facility.
think,
That was an
I don't think I'm going
question.
too far on a limb saying they should be responsible for the maintenance, and I think they will. But,
Tenants improvement,
That'll be in the definitive agreement.
right?
yeah.
Should be tenant improvement,
They're
whatever
going
is
to-
within the scope of, you know,
They have to do it in their own
internal, yeah.
hospital, like
Well,
they do at Price.
That's what property management is, you have
You're
to,
gonna have to recarpet this place or
Yeah.
retile it.
Oh, yeah.
everything has to
The
be
carpet will
absorbed. Yeah, it has to be
So that's-
absorbed.
Okay, let Steve move on. Is there any
No,
other? You're
no,
done?
really, I don't, any other, I'm happy with this discussion, because it shows
Okay.
you thinking about things that we need to build into that agreement.
Okay, just want to make sure
From the
everybody's
fiscal
getting equal
standpoint.
opportunity.
And a lot of these conversations are legal conversations too, and you're represented by legal counsel
Yeah.
that covers these kinds of
Mhm.
things in the real estate agreement, so.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, now, just some other things we're going to now have to add. Things that you didn't see up there that we've identified, we had a conversation, again, talking about Moss Adams, and we'll have to build in a little more to do the final payroll expense. It's not as big as the stuff we were talking about. There could be some unaccounted for or after, some consulting fees and legal fees that hit after the deal is signed. We'll have to make sure we build in for that.
What, about 100 grand or?
Probably. We'll have to do some work on it, but I don't think it will be inexpensive. It won't be $147. It will be more digits than that. So
50.
50 to
You brought it up, so I
$100.
wanna know.
Okay, I'd say, okay, top of my head, 50 wouldn't be a bad number. Okay. After affiliation, we're going to have to figure out how to collect the district's accounts receivable, because the money owed the district before affiliation
Still
belongs
belongs
to
to
the
the
district.
district.
Couple just ideas. Only my ideas is, you could pay Overlake to do it, we could outsource it, or we could keep staff on board to do it. So, I have to think through that. Just
Right.
how do we collect? Generally, we have $6 million worth of accounts receivable at any point in time. So you think of December, say it closes December 31st of 2020. We'll have $6 million that we billed that will be owed. We have to collect that somehow.
Well, wait a minute. Why do we have to collect it? Why don't we just take some money up front from them and let them?
We could
collect it?
sell it to them.
Yeah.
We
So-
could sell it to them. That's another option.
So accounts
Well,
receivable are saleable, but
Yeah.
they're saleable at a pretty big discount. It's-
They'll want a discount because of the uncertainty. It's a decision we'll have, but that's a possibility. Paying for it or selling it or collecting it ourselves.
It very likely becomes some kind of a, because, Overlake isn't planning on doing anything absolutely immediately as far as revenue cycle or anything like that, to my knowledge anyway. So it's very likely going to be some kind of an agreement where, the people that collect right now continue to collect and remit in a different way.
Yeah.
That's the kind of the easiest way to do it, I would
I'm
suspect.
wondering if they had the rights to the accounts receivable right out, they need the money right away to start, right? They need money, it'd be nice for them to be getting accounts receivable this first year. They could pay us back in some other ways.
It's the negotiating
So,
point, yeah.
yeah.
That's a possibility.
Because
Have
that's
them
always
do
a-
it and,
I actually have done a couple of medical medical practice sales, and that's a really big item.
oh, yeah, that is.
To
You
have
think about
some
$6
money
million.
coming in the first month.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
So, something we'll have to consider and negotiate with them going forward. Another, this thing that came up when we talked to Eric Nicholson from Los Adams on accounts receivable is, we'll have $6 million worth of accounts receivable. At some point, say it generally, we were talking about in finance, say it takes us 60 days to collect our accounts receivable, so take us 60 days to collect this. At some point when you've collected it, you come to a point and you say, oh, we've estimated what's uncollectible. We might not have estimated enough. You have just an uncollectible balance. You have to write it down on your books. It'll hit the income for the district, if the district owns it, and that's, again, and it could impact your bond covenants, your coverage requirements. Just something to consider and work through as we do the final numbers and do the negotiation on this deal. So I hadn't thought of
So it
that.
would end up being a non-cash expense.
A non-cash expense.
So it would then impact your coverage ratio, which we're
Yeah.
going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. And the final point, and Keith will go more into this, I think, say at some point the district doesn't meet one of its coverage ratios, means we have to call in a consultant to ensure compliance the next year. It's just what happens in our bond companies. Now, I think I'm turning it over to Keith.
why don't we get a guarantee from Overlake about that?
That's something you could do, is put in a contingency payment. If we don't meet, or if it looks like we're not going to meet our bond covenants, Overlake would fund it so we would.
How would we not if they're paying? How would we not?
I'd have to think through the details of it. We could possibly structure it.
It is one of the things that we
Overlake.
see, I think what everybody has noticed is that money's going to be tight under the scenario where, Overlake pays 105% of debt service, and that's it, and walks away, right? So that's what we're illustrating, I think, here, is that money will be tight. I think if you want me to move on to the
Yeah, go
next
ahead.
part.
Keith's going.
I think the important thing to remember is that this will be what your income statement, or some form of this is what your income statement will look like. At the end of the day, we still need it to comply with the bond covenants, right? So remember that right now, your bond covenants are that you will cover your maximum annual debt service. You'll make enough cash flow to cover your maximum annual debt service 1.2 times. The last 2 years, that has been met and exceeded, and this year looks good. So the idea is that is still going to continue to stick around. The fact that you have to bring in enough money to have a little cushion over what you actually have to pay in revenue bond debt service, that never goes away until the bonds go away. Because if you look at it from the bondholder's perspective, they still view you like this. This is now the entity that they have purchased bonds in, so they need to see that 1.05 times coverage at the end. you're still going to have a liquidity requirement. So you're still going to have to keep a certain amount of cash on hand. That liquidity requirement is going to change a little bit because your expense base is a lot lower, and that liquidity requirement is based on your expense base. So you'll see what that does here in a second too.
So we're only at 450,000 expense base.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of 27 million or whatever the number is
Yeah.
right now.
How much is it?
Well, 27.
The expenses now are probably
It's
25
probably
million.
28 million.
28 million.
Yeah.
28 million.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with this
And
would be
expense
about
base.
450,000.
Yeah, yeah,
At least the first.
Yeah.
yeah.
So then, understanding that you're always going to have, you're still going to be subject to these covenants. The question is what happens after the affiliation? What changes? Well, what we did in 2015, as you probably recall, but this is just kind of review, we said that if the entity that is guaranteeing the payments for the lease is A-rated or better, which Overlake is, that coverage ratio is no longer 120, it can be 105. But the calculation is still the same. It's still based off of this. It's not just, your revenue bonds times 105, it's what does your income statement look like? So if the district doesn't hit that 105 in the scenario that we're talking about here, that would be what we'd call a technical default. Now that doesn't mean the district's not paying its bonds or that kind of thing. You would just have to bring in a consultant to recommend.
Pay them 10 grand.
Mhm.
Go through the
To recommend, basically come in here and say,
Last time.
yep, to come in here and say, this is what you need to do in order to hit this next year, essentially. So that's what we're trying to avoid, and that's what everybody wants to avoid because you don't want to end up, in a fight with your bondholders for whatever reason. So this is from your trust indenture from the Series 2015 bonds. The bolded part there is just what I wanted to mention, and that's exactly what I just talked about. Your coverage ratio needs to be forecasted by Steve, or the finance officer of the district, who is Steve at this point, to be at least equal to 105. Again, in practice, it's very close to the 105% of revenue bond debt service because you've got expenses and you've got limited tax GO, and those kind of equal each other out. So yeah, 105%, 105% of revenue bond debt service does get you close. But it's important to remember that that's not the actual requirement. The actual requirement is that you cover your debt at 105 times, or at 1.05 times. And so what that means is here's the budget again, right? So we're taking in two streams of revenue. One is the tax levy, and that's increasing at 2%. The other is the lease payment. So you have, at this point anyway, you have leverage over what those two things are. Down below, we have the expenses right here. So salaries all the way down through utilities and supplies. You have leverage at this point, or you have direction on how to manage those, okay? Those are the only two things on the income statement that you're going to be able to manage. So as you're preparing to comply with your debt service coverage covenant, those are your two levers, okay? So if you take the budget as was presented, again, that's where we're at, and you use 105% of the actual revenue bond debt service, you get to that change in net position of negative $351,000, losing $351,000. However, $2.23 million of that is non-cash, right? That's a non-cash expense. So you take your change in net position, you add back depreciation, you add back what you paid on revenue bond interest, and then make an adjustment for how much you paid for LTGO principal, so on the principal on your LTGO bonds, and you get to this number of net income available for debt service. Now, nothing has changed on here with respect to how the covenant is calculated in 2020 compared to 2019 and 2018 and 2017. All of these are the same, but you're no longer running a hospital, so your revenue base is a lot different, and your expense base is a lot different. All of this calculation down on the bottom is exactly the same and will remain the same. You're going to have to add back these things, you're going to have to subtract out these things in order to get to a number that's greater than 105, right? So again, 105% of debt service and 2% growth in the levy, with these expense assumptions does get you to 1.08 times. However,
I was
However,
gonna say, it seems pretty easy to get to
mhm,
1.05.
however, what you're saying is, and
Mhm.
I'll interject here, is all the expenses I control are gonna come in exactly as I planned.
mhm.
Anybody who's seen our budget reports? Things happen.
Mhm.
And so there probably should be some contingency built into that. And the contingency can be,
You've essentially got, knowing
Yeah.
that you're going to have to make this calculation every year, and you need this to be above 1.05 times in order for the bondholders to not, or for you not to have a technical default on the bonds, you've got two things that you can mess with. You can mess with these cash expenses, meaning, you may have more, you may have less,
yeah.
and you can mess with the revenue. Now, coming in at 1.08 times and projecting that over time creates problems, because now we're looking 5 years into the future. The only thing that's changing in this model, which again, isn't perfect yet, but the only thing that's changing in this model is there's expense inflation associated in here that Steve put in. And there's also,
inflation there?
yeah, and there's inflation on the tax levy, right? So there's a 2% growth rate on the tax levy. So what you're seeing down here, but what you're seeing down here is all a result of those two things. That's all tax revenue that's driving the increased coverage. Doesn't have anything to do with the lease payment to the district, because that's staying constant at 105% of the debt service.
Is it possible that if we have a major downswing in depreciation in tax assessments, that 1% would not be 1%?
It's 2% there.
I know.
And there's
So
a
the
chance it'll go
1%.
down to 1%, and it could,
You could get into
You
a
could get
point in
into
time
it.
when you're rationing
Yeah.
again. So,
yeah,
gosh, I don't remember how long it was, 2013, 2014?
probably, yeah.
It was.
It was
Yeah.
2013, 14.
Yeah.
Yes, so if you get to a point where your assessed valuation has decreased enough,
Mhm.
where the 101 that you're taking every year catches up to that decrease, and this is a Brad Berg question, better than me, but I know a little bit about it.
Mhm.
But if you get to that point,
Yeah.
then you could be in a position to get rationed. So that could go down.
What does that
I
mean?
haven't done the-
Position to be rationed, what does that mean?
So you collect right now, what, 42 cents?
Yeah.
Let's
Roughly
say
42
it's 42 cents. In 2013, 2014, you had the ability to collect up to like 54 cents based on the assessed valuation, but because there's other taxing districts that overlap you, you were cut off at a maximum of 50 cents of that valuation.
Oh, really?
So you would collect less tax revenue, and that would then impact that debt service
Mhm.
that you're seeing.
Now, you are a ways away from that point,
Yeah.
and what happened back then, and particularly what's happened since then with Snoqualmie Ridge, it makes that fairly unlikely, but it's still a possibility. And again,
Well,
that's something that we should be looking at as
Yeah.
we get through the next 6 months, and something that Brad will be looking at as well.
Yeah.
And then
Probably
you think about it, you're looking 5 years down the road.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but I cannot predict what's going to be,
Right.
things are
No,
going to
but
be in
you
5
can
years,
predict
so,
that they'll run out of space to build new construction.
yeah, yeah.
Because the water rights out
Yeah.
here are limited in
Mhm.
North Bend
Mhm.
and Snoqualmie.
Mhm.
So they will run out of space
Yeah,
and water.
There are a number of ways to handle it. One would be a contingency in the agreement, that if the district's going to forecast that the district will not meet its debt service
Right.
requirements,
Right.
overlay goes more.
It
So-
probably won't happen, just the late 2020.
Who knows? Yeah.
So as we talked about, right, you've got a lever here, you can cut expenses, right? That's difficult to do when you've only got a $400,000 expense base.
Not much.
You can increase your revenue off the bat by changing what that lease payment is to the district. Maybe there's an inflator on there. Maybe it starts at higher than 105%. That's the understanding that everybody has, because it's a nice round number,
Yeah.
but it may not work. The third thing is what Steve just mentioned, and and we haven't fully vetted this or thought about this or whatever, but one thing that came up on the conversation that we had with Moss Adams was, well, what if it's something like this, where if we're getting close to hitting that 1.05 times, just for the sake of making sure that you don't default on the bonds or have a technical default on the bonds, there could be some kind of a way to make a lease payment adjustment that counts as revenue in order to catch up, so to speak. But then, you know, it does open, that opens up a whole can of worms that we don't need to get into all of the aspects of today. But it opens up a whole other can of worms, because then if you're sitting in Overlake's chair, you're thinking, well, you can just trigger this by spending way too much money. You know, you've got that $450,000. You can just trigger this by spending way too much money. So that would be a complicated way to put the arrangement together, but it's another thing that we thought of as a way to, you know, provide some cushion. You know, and so what we did on the top here, this one would be using the other lever, and that is, you know, instead of 105% of revenue bond debt service, you use 100, or the lease payment that you accept is 110% of debt service. It's 5% larger. It's a bigger payment that Overlake has to make, and it gives you more cushion.
So aren't we forgetting about some revenue that we have right now going as in our bond investments? Gotta be $20,000, $30,000 a year.
Not
that.
not a real significant amount.
Right, and unrealized.
We're looking at
It's
30,000
it's
here.
unrealized until the bond
Yep.
is paid off.
And so any income that you have that's unrealized in investment income does not, whoop, oh boy, I pressed the stop button. There we go.
Well, that was easy.
It doesn't go into this calculation if
So
it's
it's-
unrealized investment income.
Yeah.
And again, the calculation is what's going to drive a technical default or not. Now, what's happening here, and gosh, I wish we took it out last minute, Steve, we had the day's cash on hand.
Oh, I know, we did.
But what's happening here is, yes, you're covering, you know, at a minimal level in really any of these scenarios. But remember, all along, this 2.2 million, this 2.1 million, this 2.1 million, that's all cash that's getting added to your balance sheet. Because that's an expense, that's a non-cash expense. So every year, your balance sheet grows by that much.
Yeah, so you have a good cash buildup, but it's that debt service coverage that will be the kind of difficult thing to manage in a budget and to figure out how do we ensure, what provisions do we put in to ensure the district meets that requirement.
Well, I still think that we need to have some money available right away for our outreach programs. I mean, the public isn't going to like us
so
just not
We
doing
have to do
anything.
something quickly,
Well-
so they know that we're making a good choice.
Yeah, so there's the cash that you have now. The question is how is that cash, what does that cash look like, and who's got access to it after the start? You've got $6 million,
$6 million.
$6 million worth of cash. And so part of what we're talking about is a trust account that's either all of that 5 or 6 million that Overlake can use to subsidize operations and or make capital improvements, but the district also has access to it. So that's a portion of it. And then there may also be a portion of it that's just the districts and remains the districts and isn't a part of that trust fund.
So there's probably a way, and I have to think about it, to have a pool of money that you could fund community outreach that wouldn't hit the P&L and wouldn't affect that debt service coverage number.
Yeah, I don't know how.
I don't know how, but we'd have to figure it out.
Right, so that's the other,
Grants.
yeah.
Yeah, or something, we'd have to figure it out, yeah. Talk to some accountants, like Eric Nicholson will like us.
I would like to see if 10 million put up by Overlake, we could put half of our cash in that trust. I think you need at least 13 million on a restart, if not more.
Right. So over time through 2025.
Yeah, that's,
The balance sheet will grow.
The balance sheet
If
will
it's structured
grow.
right and the district manages its expenses appropriately, the balance sheet will grow, just not by leaps and bounds. And the question is does it grow enough to get to that point, you know, by 2025?
And I really would like a really in-depth analysis of what it would take to restart. I mean, we're talking
Yeah,
about new
we're gonna-
equipment, remodel of the hospital, and
Is this if they
recruiting.
falter? Because you tell
Hold
you.
on, hold on.
Okay.
And recruiting, which is like 5 million right there. So I want to see a really good analysis. I want to see that money in 2025 in the bank for this deal to work.
We're gonna have to do some modeling of you, that what would it take to start this place up?
Yeah.
I mean, the hospital's already operating, but the district takes over. I'd have to do some thinking on that.
We give them the incentive to keep operating and buying us.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at it this way though, not just to play devil's advocate for a second.
I know that there's, you wouldn't want that, of
Right.
course.
But they're gonna be
Yeah.
taking over on,
Yeah.
let's say it's January 1 of 2020. They're not going to immediately need to throw $15 million at the hospital. So their position will likely be, no, we'll give it back to you the same way that you gave it to us.
Yeah. I mean, if you, I'm gonna, maybe you can hate this, I'm gonna switch to a glasses half full conversation for a second here. Their reputation is on the line for 5 years. They have incentive to maintain quality operations, maintain the facility in a very nice fashion, and do the required maintenance on it. So that's a glass half full conversation. Glass half empty is they don't do it. So somewhere in between is we need a kind of a reasonable, what's the cost of restarting this for the district? And the biggest cost will be recruiting and getting management, and then some timing too. I mean, you don't recruit a really good management team in a day and a half. So it takes a while, so you maybe outsource management for a while. Just some thoughts
And
as I think about it.
That's why they need the AR to begin with.
Maybe.
Okay.
Commissioner
Herring would
yeah.
like to say something.
I understand that one of our obligation or responsibilities to look at the revenue and our expenses. Those are the two areas that we needed to
Mhm.
control.
Mhm.
So in terms of expenses, we talk about property taxes here and assessment values. What my question is, does King County have a program to reduce that for municipalities or public entities, public hospitals like they do with, residents of King County?
we don't
Or is
pay
there a program
property-
like that that we could
We don't pay
look
property
into?
taxes now.
No?
There's a
No,
hospital
we
fee
pay
they do
the
not.
surface water management fee on East Campus.
Nothing,
That's
huh?
the only thing
Well,
we
I
pay.
just thought,
Yeah.
look at that
Not a bad idea.
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we'll see where it is. Okay.
You see
Commissioner
benefits
Howard, what's
taxes,
that?
those are salary-based taxes.
I'm
I
sorry.
don't know whether this is a proper place to mention this, but going from a glass half full to a glass half empty, or.
Okay. How about three
is-
quarters?
I think there could be occasion for disputes
Oh,
along these
yeah.
lines.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, I just want to toss out those words, mediation
Mhm, mhm.
and arbitration. We need to think about building mediation process into the agreement, dispute resolution somehow, so everybody can get along, but we have it structured so that when we have differences, we can get it resolved.
Yeah, that's very good, because well-meaning people don't always agree.
And I think there is some language about that in the LOI too.
Almost every agreement you have, there's a mediation.
There needs to move from the LOI to the agreement, though, doesn't it?
Familiar with that. Yeah.
There are, every agreement.
Every
has-
agreement has, it, yeah, yes.
You
Well,
can
that's a
do
good point.
relaxed rules.
It's
and
the Full
everything.
Employment Act for attorneys.
Yeah. You guys like it? Okay.
Other questions?
Any other questions? Been good discussion and given us some feedback as we go through and refine this. This is not the last time you'll see it. Next time won't be the last time you'll see it. You'll see it a number of times as we go through various iterations based on feedback from you guys.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that we're having this conversation this far in advance too is, there is going to be a point in time when documents start flowing around, et cetera. And so what we wanted to make sure that we did was make sure that everybody has in their brain, not just you guys, Overlake as well, will eventually need to have in their brain that this is what the hospital looks like afterward, and this is how we have to manage the district, and it's not necessarily just 105% of revenue.
Yeah, no,
That's- it's a simpler way to talk about it, but it's not the way that it's actually written. So this will be a conversation that we have, I think, probably fairly soon
Yeah.
with overlay, and not necessarily having exactly the right budget or anything like that, just so they understand this concept that the district still has to operate, And this is the view in which your bondholders are going to look at you.
So if this is what we have, well, and they do look at it, are we gonna get any response from them? Are we gonna hear what their take is on this, or are we just?
Yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
part of the negotiation process.
Yeah.
Yep.
Once we do our refining of it and put it in front of them, then they're gonna come back, and there'll be some back and forth, I'm sure.
You might want to impose or go back to the history of the what-ifs and,
Make sure.
things that come up
Yeah.
and cite the actual things that have happened, or payments. Everything shuts down. Oh God, I can remember for like that one year, we had 2 different shutdowns for Medicare. Remember, we're not.
Oh, the one time that Medicare system screwed up and they couldn't pay us?
Yeah.
Yeah, that time, I
Well,
remember.
which time? So,
It seemed to happen,
Those
it
things.
seemed to happen
Once,
once,
and then
but it
then our
went on
PHR
for a
migration.
long time. Yeah, months.
What if the county doesn't pay us our taxes because some screw up? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That they come in 30 days late. They don't come in 2019, they come in 2000.
I think if we showed cash balances, you'd say, there will be enough cash
Yeah.
to cover that type of thing.
Yeah,
So
remember,
the
we're
next time you
starting-
see this, we'll have
Yeah.
a cash balance.
And we
So-
had it, honestly, we wanted to focus on,
Yeah.
the income statement. We had it in a previous version of this.
We did.
But your days cash on hand over time, and you start with $6 million. So it's not a question of, will the hospital be able to pay its bills after the date, right? Let's say it's December 31,
Yeah.
2019. It's not a question of whether or not the hospital will be able to pay the remainder of its bills. It's how paying those bills is reflected on the income statement and ultimately gets taken into account in your coverage requirement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's you will have the $6 million on hand.
And then, that cash buildup is, okay, what happens to that? Is it put in a trust, some of it put in a trust for walkaway or the district taking over? Just the questions we've been talking about. And that's, again, the negotiating point we're gonna have with overlay.
And I guess for some of us on the board, if there's those funds there, we have ideas of how we would like to actually reach out to the community and meet some community needs. So we're already thinking, what can we do just to make sure that our community meets some of those things that are in our document
Right.
about our needs assessment?
Right, so as far as, and I speak from a narrow view, right, there's lawyers and everybody that has opinions on this stuff too. But remember that with respect to cash, when we're all said and done, your requirement is going to be that you need to keep at least 60 days of cash on hand. It's the same requirement as it is now, but your expense base is a lot different, so that number is much, much smaller. If I can remember right, to the days cash on hand calculation that we did for
Yeah.
this, it was in the like 500 day.
Yeah, it was a whole lot of days cash on hand.
Because your expense base changes so much.
Yeah, so that
You said
cash.
how many days? 500?
Say
It's
400,
like-
so that we're saying.
I would say
450
350,
a year.
but something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For 500 a year
Yeah.
for
But
60.
the cash balance is not so much days cash on hand, it's, okay, that cash is available for a contingency or a walkaway. Again, you brought up, how do we
Okay,
fund
yeah.
community outreach potentially with some of the cash we have now? So that's something we're gonna have to go look at and present various options in
Yeah.
the next iteration you see of this budget. So
And the trust agreement
trust
is really the
agreement,
big
those two
component of
things.
that.
Yeah.
I kind of think too that maybe for us as a board, we're going to need to have some education of how we function once we start doing something like this. Where are our rules? What does our job description really look like?
And that's why
That's
it's
true.
so
We still have
important
our
that those two
bylaws.
staff that you hire,
Yeah.
they have to be really skilled in insight into this type
Yeah.
of thing. And that's why even Steve was saying,
Oh.
the administrative role, you've got a superintendent in the administrative role, just really has to have some finance and some insight into
Right.
how to work this.
And there's the four things that you mentioned off the bat, so,
Right.
which were,
Quickly.
yeah,
That.
the landlord,
The landlord,
Right.
managing tax revenue.
Mhm.
Population health.
Population
oversight
health.
of tax,
And,
and managing
uh,
revenue bond requirements.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And with the revenue bond compliance, Piper will be here still, Foster Pepper will be here still to help you with that stuff, and Moss Adams will be here to help calculate covenants and testing and all that kind of stuff as they do, as we do right now.
Will you also be representing overlay?
I don't represent.
So you will be assisting our,
Yeah, I mean, as I have since
Yeah.
2015,
Okay, just
when we
to
did
clarify,
the
yes.
transaction, yeah.
Just to put a plug in,
Yeah.
thank you for engaging Piper Jaffray as a consultant, because now I don't feel guilty about of using Keith and his analyst for doing these calculations, so it really helps. Yeah.
So how soon can we have some kind of an idea, plus or minus $1 million on a restart cost?
Give us,
That's a complicated
that's
question.
a complicated, it's gonna take us a couple months, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Give us a couple
That's a
months.
complicated question. I think we
Because
have
we're gonna have to talk to some people and,
there are ways to structure the agreement such that nobody is left hanging, and that would be the goal. You can take a look at some of the affiliation agreements that have happened around the state and use those to model, and this is what the lawyers are there for.
Yeah.
Use those to model the what ifs, what happens, how do we come together, how do we separate, and that's all part of the documentation that will.
So would we want to have a work study when we get to that point so we all can see what those look
Oh, yeah.
like? Yeah.
you'll see us
Okay.
more than you want.
Yeah.
You're getting tired of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will.
I mean, there's gonna
We
have to
wanna
be
keep you involved
resolutions,
in
yeah, there's gonna have to be resolutions passed
Oh,
and,
yeah.
with the documents and all that kind of stuff, so, yeah.
and just to follow up on David's, Commissioner Spiker, sorry, concern about how soon can this be? If it appears, to me at least, that we are looking at, by the end of this year, we will be post-affiliation already by then, because we have the
Kim, you got
2020.
some insight in that.
Yeah.
Dr. Wickup.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
So I
okay,
had
sure.
two things, and one of them was that.
Okay.
And that is, the displays here for the purpose of kind of getting everybody's brains in here
Okay.
have a start date of 2020, but in reality, the document, the agreement will be signed by the end of this year, but
Okay.
the transition will not happen because we have almost an entire year waiting for the certificate of need process.
Okay.
So that as you're going back and looking at it and trying to align it to what is our lived experience will be probably more in 2021.
Okay.
But for the purposes of understanding this
Yeah.
and seeing it for the multi-year,
Mhm.
and being able to think about it from where we are right now,
Okay.
this is the helpful display.
And it's,
Okay.
and
But
it,
just remember, it's
Yeah.
really
Good enough. I
not-
guess I was
Yeah.
pushing it forward,
It's
thinking,
really not
wanting to
looming.
make sure
Yeah.
that,
yeah, and
Yeah,
so.
it's not
we are on
looming
track.
on us right now.
okay.
Yeah. but-
That hanging year too is one of the reasons that we have to stay in constant contact with Moss Adams so
Yeah.
that they can help us understand. But, this is a nice clean break. But what does the income statement actually going to look like in the event that it transitions 3, 4, 5 months into the year? If you look at what happened up in Cascade Valley, not to say that this is bad or anything, their income statement for 1 year looks extremely strange because they only took in a half a year's worth of revenue and had all these expenses, and so it was very strange because their agreement actually closed on 6/30 of 2017 or whatever year it was. But that's why we'll have to be talking to Moss Adams
Yeah,
about it.
that's what
I would think that you might want to go to some of these smaller hospital closures and people that, or the entities that took over, how much money did they actually have to come up with to restart the hospital? And use that as kind of a base and then modify that maybe?
Dr. Wickup.
I had my second point.
Go for second
Yeah, I had
point.
two. This is
All
my
right,
second
sorry.
one. That's all right. So, and this actually is speaking to the topic you're on. If, at the end of 2025, if Overlake departs because they couldn't make it, I
No
think,
way we-
I think we really, this is just a reality statement.
Yeah.
We have to be prepared
Plan
to
B.
open up something that is absolutely different.
Yeah.
If we will not be opening up as this more traditional hospital, because if they can't make it, and whatever that environment is at that moment, us coming in and investing a lot of dollars to reopen it will not be the answer either. That just means we have to be prepared for creativity, but it also makes it hard to protect.
But we have to
If they
remain a
depart
critical
for a
access
different
hospital.
reason, if they depart for a different reason, for
Mhm.
some political climate that we don't understand, and they're doing great, it's just they have a different reason for leaving, whole different ballgame,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
No, good
coming in
point.
and continuing
Yeah.
on. It just,
Yeah.
that's what makes it challenging. So we could definitely get together the expenses that we had for starting up in 2015, this facility, and then just doing some adjustments to think about, we bought a new CT scanner because we were moving in here, that CT scanner's still gonna be sitting there in 5 years. So just what are gonna be the expenses with bringing that back online to us, So I think we could come up with something that way.
Is it going to be the standard of care in 2025?
Well, it is only 5 years, 5 years from now, and we know the life expectancy of all the big dollar items that are in here. They have very standard life expectancies. We're depreciating against those life expectancies. So I think that we really can do some pretty good calculations around that. But I think that's really gonna be about the recruiting staff piece. I think that's
Yeah.
really where the.
Yeah,
And now that becomes incredibly unpredictable, because it's just as possible that you inherit fully staffed and remain incredibly fully staffed
Mhm.
as it is that you're decimated and have to start from scratch.
Commissioner Culler, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I just remarked that even though we might change, the hospital might change in many ways, it still needs to be a critical access hospital with 25 beds and all of the things that go along with being a critical access hospital.
Correct,
And-
if we decide to continue with that, and the
Yes.
25 beds is a limit, it doesn't mean we have to do it.
That's true.
We have to do it, you don't even have to have the beds open.
It's maximum 25
Maximum,
beds.
yeah, you don't even have to have
The
the
other
beds
thing
open.
I was gonna pick out is, at some point, we're gonna need to look at our rules of procedure and the district bylaws. And I don't know whether we can continue to proceed for years without updating the district bylaws to reflect the new situation and the rules
Is
of
it-
procedure.
Legal counsel, is that something that is feasible here in the next,
Well, as you know, your rules of procedure now
Because it'll
can be
be-
changed at any time.
Right.
We built that into the approach, and your bylaws can be changed at any time as well. It just takes a more thorough approach. But, yeah, they can be changed at any time.
Because we all
And
need
you
to
would
have
not
a-
want to, it's a chicken or an egg. You don't want to do
Yeah.
that until you know where you're headed, so you can adapt your bylaws to meet where you want to go. Otherwise, you're trying to create new bylaws and rules of procedure without understanding where you're headed.
But at least we've talked and we know that will have to
Absolutely.
happen eventually. That
Absolutely.
We will have to do that. Thank you, Commissioner Culler. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The board is
Well, thanks for
grateful.
coming all the way out.
Yeah.
Always.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Keith.
Do you know where Xerxes and 60th is?
I live on Xerxes and 50th.
Yeah, that's where I was born.
Oh, really? It's a Fairview hospital now.
Gee.
We were talking about Southwest Minneapolis, and I'm wondering, oh, you must be really close to it.
Board members, I have for you the next topic. Steve's got that too.
All right.
Coming down.
Please pass it.
Yes, thank you. Is this you?
I'm just in around 8 minutes.
All right.
7:50?
All right, I'm going to give you a very quick update your quarterly update on compliance. As you know, I'm the compliance officer, and we report to you quarterly on compliance activities for the district. Okay, so we've had a number of audits. You're aware of most of them. Moss Adams completed their audit, made a report to the board. We had talked about this, you may not remember it. The IRS audited our Series 2015A LTGO, tax-backed bonds. The reason they did the audit, they wanted to verify that these were in fact tax-free, that the holders of the bonds did not have to pay income tax on what we paid them. And they came up with this great IRS statement: no change in the position that interest paid to owners of the bonds is excludable from gross income, which means they're tax-free. So we engaged, that's a IRS speak. We engaged District Legal Counsel, Brad Berg, to assist us with this audit. And the third thing we had a charge master review. Anybody remember what a charge master is? It's not a person sitting there that's the master of all charges. It's the document we have that controls what we bill for all of our services. And it's a very complicated document. We do entries, and we have a consultant, a gentleman named Mark Holland, that does this and just loves this, and comes out and does a charge master review every 2 years. Because if your charge master gets, technical term, messed up, it can really go bad. And Mark came in, did a charge master review, usually does, and he did this time, praised us for how well we keep our charge master up to date. And mostly what we did is we looked at, okay, items that haven't been used for a while, we're going to delete them from our charge master. So that came out very well. Kim was in the room there. Mark was very complimentary. So, and you think of charge master as a very complicated thing. Mark just loves doing this stuff, and he does a good job. So, other compliance activities. All the employees have completed their online refresher training in compliance. We use a system called Relias. We require people to log on, we pay them for the time, and it takes a couple of hours to go through and get refresher courses on compliance issues, other issues too. We had no reportable HIPAA issues, which is patient information confidentiality issues, the last quarter. 53 new employees have received compliance training so far in 2019 through June. And we had 2 public records requests that we had. So, it's a good thing. It's somewhat of a non-event in the compliance area, which means that we have controls in place, and we've been doing things to manage our compliance-related activities. Questions, comments? All right. Thank you.
Thank you. We're done.
Good.
Do we have any public comment?
Oh, sorry.
We haven't adjourned, folks.
Oh,
I'm just scratching my back.
You were showing off your review.
All right, we have no public comments, so we will move on to upcoming board meetings. Everybody take a look. Affiliation Work Study Thursday, August 8th, 2019, 4:30 to 6 East-West Conference Room. Regular business meeting, Thursday, August 8th, 2019, 6:30 here. And work study, August 29th, 2019, 6:30 North-South Conference Room.
Very good.
Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn. We don't even.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take it a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Adjourned.
Okay.